We are 66 times.
Hello again, welcome to 66 Times. My name's Peter Gurry and this is the 66 Times podcast. And you're listening to episode 4, People with a capital P. My observation is that we're both more equipped and more crippled in our ability to deliver on our data and marketing investment. And this is going to substantially hinder our ability to prepare and ready ourselves for the next crisis. I'll be focusing on the people perspective. I'm going to leave it to you to extrapolate how the remaining P's become part of the solution. I also want to remind you that I'm not going to give you all the answers. I can't, in fact, give you all the answers in this format. However, I am definitely going to make you think, and I'm definitely going to give you something to walk away with and action within your business. So right off the bat, I'm going to challenge you. I'm going to challenge you on the people point. If your businesses do not align on the concept that the customer and the prospect are very much the same thing. However, the only thing that separates them is the fact that one is paid and one hasn't. One is committed and one hasn't. Now, in terms of your tooling, in terms of your process, in terms of your information that is captured and should be kept and should be acted on, the prospect and the customer are intrinsically entwined. And if you're to respond and if you're to be meaningful, you build your insight from the prospect into the customer journey. Now, I know full well that most businesses are not aligned on this, have very separate teams, have very separate processes, and are somewhat divisive in the sense that the prospect, the acquisition, and the customer and the retention are very different indeed. Large platforms, programs of work tend to bring them together, but not close enough, not readily enough. Now, I like to add the internal stakeholder, the internal team member, the user of the system, the ultimate deliverer. Now, these people have the same common aspects as well. The same tools, the same processes should apply. They all have anxieties. They all have challenges. They all need to be guided. I fully appreciate this might sound like crazy talk, the work of the devil or some sort of witchcraft, but it is just pragmatic. Now, again, drawing it back to the topic, if we're to drive revenue in moments in crisis, the more you can align those three, the prospect, the customer, and the internal business to be clear and confident and to act swiftly, well, then that is a recipe for competitive advantage. Another guiding principle is the concept of simplicity. A lot of overcomplication goes on without even realizing it. It's just deemed to be essential. And with that comes your first mistake. Now, a lot of businesses look to the brand as being an all-knowing, glowing, perfect entity, and that should know everything and should actually tell the customer and prompt the customer. Now, that is an absolute fallacy. The customer can be part of their own journey. We've just got to be smart enough to respond to when it changes. So if you were going to think about a good sales as a service mindset, well then, of course, you keep an open dialogue. Of course, you ask and you respond to what you hear back. Now, a lot of businesses go to great lengths to join all the dots together to create versions and segments of the customer based on what they see. Now, no one actually asks the customer as to what their preferences are, what held products they possess. It's embarrassing to ask what held products they possess. Well, not if it's done in the right way. So simplicity is the key from the very damn start. What I'm not saying here is that we let the customer go willy-nilly and that they know ultimately best, because we do know that if left unguided and unsupported, initial information provided would quickly become out of date, would quickly lack context. So therefore, when you establish a state that is set by a client, the next requirement is to ensure that is validated continually, because it will change. You'll also have to forgive me, and don't think me daft, but I'm not going to mention anything like machine learning, artificial intelligence, machine modeling, anything like that. Don't take my tone as having me saying they're irrelevant, but they are in fact very confused in market. They are in fact complex. And they do in fact warrant their own series altogether and somewhat fly in the face of the concept of simplicity. For a moment here, I'm going to ask you to imagine, if you would, that I've just spent a good 5 minutes or so telling you about all the strategic revenue segments and the automated journeys and the highly personalized content modules, content blocks, whatever you want to call them. I've just told you all about this long list of things that you can action, but I'm going to assume you can do that already. I'm going to assume it's a matter of having the time, having the process, having the flexibility to conceive and action and evolve these. Maybe you need a little bit of help along the way, there's no sin in that. However, picture me just giving you that laundry list that you already know for yourself. So don't get me wrong, I'd love to help you do it, if indeed you do need help or would prefer to validate it. But for the sake of time, let's skip that step and let's get stuck into the bits that really matter. And it is for the following reasons that people is my first, and as mentioned, most important P. And to make this as clear as possible, I've distilled it into 3 people points. Those are readiness, second, recovery, and third, repetition. So when I talk readiness for change. And this is incredibly important at the individual level, at the team level, and in the interdepartment relationship level. So readiness is quite a broad concept because it can come apart at the seams. Everything can come apart at the seams from this one point, this idea of readiness. And it comes down to the ability to communicate, the ability to accept, the ability to approach a situation differently and cohesively at the same time. So everybody needs to stick to their knitting, but everybody needs to have trust and faith. The following points from readiness, such as recovery and repetition, they're obviously directly entwined with the idea of readiness, but at a tactical level, there are different sets of tools and reporting and visualization required in order to ensure that the recovery and repetition elements are supporting this concept of readiness itself. Readiness is an overarching objective. You can't build continual change off the back of your people investment without this note of readiness. Now, the mature business, the one operating to the principles that we've been talking about in these podcasts, the mature business will be looking at their continuity cost targets and their continual improvement cycle targets as well. Now, obviously, these are people reliant, but if there's continuity and that there's clarity on continual improvement and how many cycles are aimed by the business to achieve, the ability to see the feasibility of those targets at a more granular level by observing these people readiness and the cycle readiness of repetition and recovery. So those early elements, those very easy to adopt but rather complex little tools themselves, are essential to establishing an insightful view of the business's ability to respond and its ability to achieve the set targets for their competitive advantage. And it is at this point we arrive at the end of episode 4, where we've explored in another level of detail the people with a capital P, and how readiness, recovery, and repetition are visualized in the business. We're now ready to look into episode 5. Episode 5 will take us from theory into practice, where we look in detail at what it is that takes us from these rules and these philosophies and into a business as usual approach that can be adopted day one. All right, see you soon.